Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Samuel Adams Returns. Those Anti-federalists, boy, it is proving even more so that they got it right. And we are in 2024. This is the first program of the year, and I'm delighted that you are with me. This week's program, as you go to samueladamsreturns.net and see the program blog post there, the newsletter, please read that. And I guess this year I'm going to ask, if you really like this, go ahead and click subscribe, like, and all those things you're supposed to do on Rumble or YouTube if you watch the program on either of those two media. Otherwise, a lot of you listen to it on podcasting, so on those appropriate podcast channels. I know that more people listen on podcasts. Please do the same thing. If there's a capacity or the ability to like the podcast, please do that. Well, let's jump into this, as it is time to ask the hard questions as we go breakneck into the new year. Why are you surprised and angry about anything, let alone what's happening? I know. For the last 50 years, most of you were able to see this year approaching like what? Like a fully loaded coal locomotive, bellowing smoke and steam, heading right at you. Not. As we know, most of the people, especially with the advent of all of this media capability, really didn't start getting engaged until 2010, 14 years ago. Whereas there have been many of us that have been engaged since the 60s, 70s, and 80s in this fight for liberty. I can understand then to some extent why the majority of you are so surprised and angry. You see, most citizens didn't see the track being laid, even though they were the minions hammering the nails into the ties. These subtle hydras of destruction, so well made up with rosy blush, large fake eyelashes, blue and purple eyeshadow, and that deep red lipstick, have the mesmerizing hallucinogens of pride, envy, deceit, and, as I heard some Christians say, blissful ignorance in each serpent lock of their hair. Yes, here in these United States, we have hydras in the churches, local government, state government, all bureaucracies, and fully infested at every level of the federal government. My friends, to defeat these hydras, you would be expecting a many Hercules to burst into Lemurian swamps of the aforementioned locations. It is not to be so that some mythical hero should win the day over the real monsters of governance. Too many, including so-called conservative Christians and conservatives, have been living in the realm of myth, science fiction, and fantasy. When the facts are predicted, reality has been shining bright regardless of the swamp fog bellowing over the minds of those who take the easy way and end as the dead men of Dunharrow. What I've been doing, and I started last year, is going, especially for those that are getting the newsletter, kind of jumping to a conclusion first. And yes, this week I am taking and reading from my newsletter because I think it's pretty interesting what I was able to compose, if you will. So in our 2024 living history, it is difficult in the era of digital gaggles to find a flock to form up with. It seems that there are at least 6 decillion, and for those that don't know their math well, that's 10 to the 51st power. I could have even gone bigger, but I thought that was more realistic when we talk about all the internet sources for you to garner your needed decision-making information from. If I went any larger than that, it would really be confusing. So I have to thank you for tuning into this program, because you have those, what did I say? 6 decillion choices out there. Maybe a little smaller, but you know, when you get to all the individual bloggers and the media capabilities and the internet, and you know, just go look at all the podcasts, could be pretty close. So, yet, here you are. And I'm thankful that you are here with this program. Now, taking into account that large number of resources, I decided to address, why are you surprised and angry? Why? You have so many resources to take in, you know, go fly with the flock. Get into that gaggle. I will take this program to reference some of my favorites that I like. And they'll be down in more in the news articles. Some are embedded here in what's there at samueladamsreturns.net. They're actually embedded in the newsletter. But when I take and I start looking at what there is, my intention is that I hope to quell your anger and give you several of my more favorable gaggles for you to fly with. Now, with all that, okay, all that's been predicted since the writing of the Anti-federalist in relationship to what could happen in a constitutional United States if we lost our morality and public virtue. Can't have public virtue without having private virtue. Otherwise, you are a hypocrite. So why are you surprised and angry at our present time when you take all of that in consideration and what the Anti-federalist wrote? Not only that, as I brought out in a few other programs, what was written in the state constitutional conventions regarding the new Constitution. All of the potential problems, which is our reality, are already written and predicted about. So this program's not just a review of 2023 through the views of most notable pundit protagonist of the day. I will incite you with a number of other notable reviews, but more so, I will cause you to shudder at the predictions of the past, the 18th century past for the most part. So let me put this into the conclusions for you, and I am thankful that you're continuing to listen to this part, is that my predictive conclusions for 2024 are very simple. You know, I'm so simple, and that all I can say at this moment is buckle up, gear up, and saddle up, since the enemies of the Republic are more deeply embedded and fortified than Hamas tunnels. The nation is being invaded by criminal bad actors, and as I said last week, every person crossing either border without going through the proper immigration methods in this country are criminals. Unlike what Nikki Haley said, we shouldn't call them criminals because, you know, they need our help. No, they're criminals. Each and every one are criminals, bad actors. And the depth of the invaders' treachery is unmanageable, not unimaginable, because we can imagine it, but it's unmanageable with incompetence, but more like purposeful intent. But even Democrat cities and that are freaking out with everything that's happening there. No, it is purposeful intent of and for harm from those in charge. And as I brought out last week, there is that plan and paid NGOs with your tax dollars causing this invasion. Now, what I want to say is that our elections are afoul with their own hydras, slithering from state to state, spewing the lubricants of fraud and deception and zuckerbucks. You think he'll do that again? I think so. Well, CIA, all the other intel groups, yep, spewing fraud and deception. Can't stop there. The majority of the churches, including many of the conservative evangelicals, are not just mired in the swamp. They are waist deep in the goo. Education outside of homeschooling or some other good constitutional charter school will continue to intensify in their indoctrination of the minions and creating them. Oh yes, I almost forgot. The biolabs are ready with solutions to pollution. More blue towels with strings. And don't forget about Bill's Wonder Wafer. To all this, add the total annihilation of personal liberty through the freedom to choose the basics of our society. That being clothes, cars, methods of cooking, means of heating, and what you're supposed to eat. You've seen all of this in other articles. I mean, my goodness, it's there in front of you. They're actually even bringing it into the different pundits and talk shows, and all of them are talking about at various layers and levels all of these things. So this is nothing new. You've seen 2023, but the intensity for 2024 draws me to buckle up, baby. Buckle up. And don't forget, the Anti-federalists did predict. They predicted lawfare. This violation of true justice will convulse as the horn of plenty looks so juicy to the gluttonous globalist. Now, is there an upside in my predictions? Of course. I'm a postmillennialist. History, the human story since creation, is littered with exactly what was occurring in 2023 and will continue in 2024 until we see what has made the changes in history, and we see the falling on knees and faces with individual and national repentance. Until then, well, judgment does have its place in bringing about a plan greater than that of the World Economic Forum and other agents of their own lusts, envy, greed, and perversions. Therefore, I'm not going to come up with anything new and revealing here. I'm going to give you pronouncements of others, and most of them in articles linked down in the weekly article portion of this programming and the newsletter. Some are from the past, some the present, that will be a cross spectrum of surprise, anger, and hopeful insights into 2024. Now, to get you started, I recommend the video and the article 11 Resolutions for 2024 Culture War Edition. Yepper, it is from Blog and Mablog. Get used to it. Truth hitting you between the eyes helps you to get focused. Sam Adams understood that, and I'm encouraging you to fight for liberty in 2024. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the second segment, and we're just going to jump right into why are you surprised and angry when it has been said? It has been said. Well, it's predicted. All of this has been predicted, not like the prophecies of the Old Testament, but it is predicted in a prophetic manner, like how many of the prophets looked, except for the specific words of God given to them, looked at the condition of the world around them. So the Anti-federalists were predictive in the fact they understood human nature and how people would react in society to the extent that they can make and did make predictions about what could happen in this constitutional republic. And they did. Not only did they do so in what we have in relationship to the Anti-federalist papers, but it's also woven in those state constitutional conventions on the federal constitution. So if you choose not to be blissfully ignorant, then foundational history and the modern media reek with the predictions for 2024. We're in a situation that we have allowed to fester, and now the pus of the neglected carbuncles are spreading. Contagious stench everywhere. Everywhere. First, I want to introduce you to the points that pronounce the destruction of a nation and society. There's a video that I found. It's called, Is Society About to Collapse? Francis Schaeffer and Jonathan Edwards on Civil Disorder by Matthew Everhard, and their key points on what both Francis Schaeffer and Jonathan Edwards had to say. So I did actually, instead of taking and having to reread and look for the exact paragraphs and all of that in my resources that I have of the books of Francis Schaeffer and all of the writings of Jonathan Edwards, I tried something new first time. And I tried that what Brave browser has artificial intelligence called Leo, and I tried it just to see how it would function in relationship to this. And it worked. Do I trust AI? No, I don't. But it was useful for this moment. So let's start with Jonathan Edwards. So here's 4 points that you can glean and were gleaned from his writings and particular sermons. 1, and we'll talk about them briefly. The importance of religious devotion. Edwards believed that society's collapse could be attributed to a lack of religious devotion and a failure to adhere to biblical principles. He emphasized the need for individuals to prioritize their relationship with God and to live according to his commandments. Look at all the different Pew research as well as other Christian research, and you find that true devotion, true understanding of biblical principles and a biblical worldview is nowhere. About 3, maybe 5% of what it was during our founding era. Nowhere near it. It's only maybe a third of what it was in the 50s and 60s. We have real problems here in not just religious devotion. There's a lot of religious people out there. I mean, anything from the LGBTQ, Church of Christ, and all of the other Unitarian debacles. that are religiously devoted, but they're not biblically sound. No truth in what they spew. The hydras, in particular, the Hydra within the church has its tentacles deeply embedded there. Number 2, the dangers of pride and self-sufficiency. Edwards often preached against the dangers of pride and self-sufficiency, arguing that these traits could lead to a society downfall. He believed that a truly humble and dependent society, one that recognizes its need for God's guidance and provision, is more likely to prosper and flourish. I've talked about this just about every program when we look at the sovereignty of God. The sovereignty of God is not us being prideful in ourselves or self-sufficient. With the sovereignty of God, it means that we're totally dependent on Him and the implementation of His will through us understanding the revelation in His Word. 3, here's where large failure is. We had a massive failure here in the state of Ohio with our governor taking over $40,000, or at least $40,000, by a hospital that does surgery on children and mutilates them. And many of our politicians and the majority of our leaders in the bureaucracies have a need for moral integrity. So that's point number 3, the need for moral integrity. Edwards stressed the importance of moral integrity in maintaining a healthy and just society. He believed that individuals and institutions, that being the bureaucracies, education, K-12, universities, churches, hospitals, any institution must uphold high ethical standards and avoid corruption, greed, all you trans doctors out there performing mutilation, abortionists, all you politicians going after and allowing the criminals to invade our country, and other forms of moral decay, all the LGBTQ insanity. 4, the potential for divine judgment. Here it is, and that's why I mentioned it in the segment number 1, is that Edwards often spoke of the possibility of divine judgment and the need for societies to repent and turn back to God before it's too late. He believed that a society that rejects God's grace and mercy is likely to experience His wrath and judgment. So true. And here we are. We're being judged. I don't care what else you think in relationship to all the political stuff, the economy stuff, all of the various issues of the day that are negative upon us and our liberties. They're only tools to judge us individually and to judge us as a nation and society. Now, Francis Schaeffer, I know a lot of people don't even know who he is anymore, but Francis Schaeffer, a Christian theologian and philosopher, identified 5 reasons why a nation might fall. And these reasons include, he flips it, he brings it to the top, moral decay and the loss of a shared sense of right and wrong. We don't have that. Look at what's going on just in the judicial system. What's right and wrong? Oh, let's let the criminals go. Let's not prosecute them. Moral decay. We've seen that once again in all of the perversion that there is, and now even with the Methodist Church in Europe going, oh yeah, man and wife or husband and wife is not right. You can't say that. That's offensive. Sorry, God defined it. So moral decay and a loss of shared right and wrong. When a society loses its moral compass and no longer agrees on basic principles of right and wrong, it can lead to social and political instability. There it is. We're experiencing it. The rise, and here's number 2, the rise of a tyrannical government that seeks to suppress individual freedom and impose its own ideology. When a government becomes too powerful and seeks to control every aspect of society, it can lead to oppression and the erosion of individual rights. I talked to you about that in the first segment. And buckle up, baby, because we're taking it hard and fast. And hey, you can't mow your lawn with a gas mower. You can't heat your house with natural gas. You can't cook with it. You have to move into an electric car. You can't own anything. Oh, it's all for the environment. Ideology. Their ideology. Number 3, economic decay and the failure of free enterprise. And I like the way he puts that, free enterprise. Economic decay is there. We're now $34 trillion in debt. 34 trillion. Just a year ago, we were 33. In 1 year, we increased $1 trillion in debt. Failure of free enterprise. We're going to talk more about that next week. I'm going to have a friend of mine, my personal attorney and constitutional attorney, on, talking about the destruction of small businesses and free enterprise here in the United States. And that's when we have, and the economy is not managed properly, it can lead to economic instability, inflation, and widespread poverty, especially when you add in all of the criminal illegals that are flooded into the various cities. 4, here's a big one, military weakness and the inability to defend the nation. When a nation's military is weak or ineffective, it can make the country vulnerable to external threats and attacks. We're there. How many billions of dollars of equipment did we leave in Afghanistan and so on? A lot. Number 5, as we look at this, the loss of a sense of spiritual hope and purpose. When a society loses its sense of spiritual hope and purpose, it can lead to a sense of hopelessness and despair, which can contribute to social and political unrest. Wow, are we there? Again, no different than what Edwards was saying in the same respect, is that what do we understand on the truth? And it's not just religious stuff, because look at how many within that religious community of all of the stupid little letters are committing suicide, have mental illness, are on drugs and depression and everything else. That's not true spiritual hope and purpose. That's just a covering. So I want you to understand is that as we go through this section, and what he had to say is it's important to note that these reasons are not mutually exclusive, that of either Edwards or Francis Schaeffer. And the fall of a nation is often the result of a combination of these factors. Additionally, it's worth noting that Schaeffer's ideas are not limited to political and economic systems, but also to individuals and their personal lives. Ladies and gentlemen, these are the key fundamentals as we get into the last section of this program that the Anti-federalists spoke about. They wrote about. It is written. It has been said. And the travesty is we do not understand this, and yet the greater travesty is that a lot of people are fearful. They're angry, and they let that anger feed their fear, and they live in a state of confusion and what to do. Well, we'll talk about a little bit what to do in the last segment, because Sam Adams and the Anti-federalists actually laid it out what to do. We don't tolerate it. So come on back in the next segment when Samuel Adams returns. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this last segment of Samuel Adams Returns and this predictive program for 2024. A little bit of a review of 23, not much, but it's a historical look. And here's where we get into that. I wanted to bring to you some of the larger formatting around the predictions that the Anti-federalists put into play, and we're not going to be able to cover them all, nor am I going to be able to get into all of the modern predictions. But like I said at the very beginning, in the section on this week's articles, in the newsletter, you will be able to see the articles, or at least the pages or the reference places that I go, that you can take and look at what is out there, who's predicting what, and so on and so forth. So let's take a look here on general taxation. In general taxation, the Anti-federalist number 8 was a power vested in Congress to sending troops for suppressing insurrection will always enable them to stifle the first struggles of freedom. This was written in March and published in March of 1788 by a federal Republican. Now I'm going to read this in detail, but taxes is embedded in there, and this is in relationship to the taxes, which what we have going on, and which we're going to talk about next week with a constitutional attorney who has filed a lawsuit dealing with a national registry for all small businesses, which this then can happen, and we have the IRS who now has a military arm to it. It's a travesty. So here's from this article, March 1788, by a federal Republican. Congress, by this new government, will be invested with the formidable powers of raising armies and lending money totally independent of the different states. They will moreover have the power of leading troops among you in order to suppress those struggling, which may sometimes happen among a free people, and which tyranny will impiously brand with the name of sedition. We had that happen in January 6th. On one day, the state collector will call on you for your proportion of those taxes which have been laid on you by the General Assembly. Where you are fully and adequately represented, were you represented adequately? On the next will come the continental collector to demand from you those taxes which shall be levied by the Continental Congress. Where the whole state of Virginia will be represented by only 10 men at this time, the founding of the nation. Thus shall we be imprudently confer on so small a number that very important power of taking our money out of our pockets and of levying taxes without control, a right which the wisdom of our state constitutions will in vain have confined to the most numerous branches of the legislature. Should the sheriff or the state collector in any manner aggrieve you, either in person or property, these sacred rights are amply secured by the most solemn compact. So the question is the taxation between the state and the federal government. Beside, the arm of government is always at hand to shield you from this injustice and his injustice and oppression. But if a continental or a federal collector in the execution of his office should invade your freedom according to this new government, which has expressly declared itself paramount to all state laws and constitutions, the state of which you are a citizen will have no authority to afford you any relief. Now, we've seen this over and over especially when the federal income tax, the 19th Amendment, came into play. Now we have even more egregious activities under the IRS that fits into this description of them constituting an army of IRS agents to come after you. Now let's take into consideration the national debt. And as I mentioned earlier, we're at $34 trillion as of now in this fiscal year. Anti-federalist number 12. How will the new government raise money? A reply to James Wilson, and I like a lot of his commentaries, and he being one of the original Supreme Court justices, concerning funding the federal government. This appeared in the November 29 and December 6, 1787 New York Journal, as reprinted from a Philadelphia newspaper by Cincinnatus. It goes on. It will be expected that the new government will provide for this also. And such expectation is found not only on the promise you hold forth of its reviving and supporting public credit among us, but also on the unavoidable principle of justice. That is, the new government takes away the impost and other substantial taxes from the produce of which the several states paid the interest of their debt or funded the paper with which they paid it. The new government must find ways and means of supplying the deficiency. Now, there's a whole formula in here that it goes through, and it talks about how the federal government now is going to come after you individually through the states to take and cover its debt. And the difference in that compared to what we would have given under the original mechanisms of taxation to the federal government. But when they overspend, they go into such debt. So now, and yet complaints of intolerable taxes has produced one rebellion and will be mainly operative in the adoption of your Constitution. How you will get this sum is inconceivable, and yet you must, or lose all credit. With magnificent promises, you have bought golden opinions of all sorts of people, and with gold you must answer them. And it goes on, and it talks about the urgency to pay and how that is, and how Congress is going to levy taxes and present a veil happily thrown over the inability of the people, and that the large power given to the new government will, to every one, expose the nakedness of our land. Certain it is that if the expectations which are grafted on the gift of those plenary powers are not answered, our credit will be irretrievably ruined. We hear that all the time. No clarity of debt or from the managers of it. That's also there in an essay that's unsigned in the Connecticut Journal in October 17, 1787. I'll let you read that for yourself. And it goes into, especially when we look at the powers of government and how many, here's a piece I have to read to you in there. It says that Congress has employed 13 commissioners at $1,500 per annum, as I am informed, to settle public accounts. And we know now no more what the national debt is than at the first moment of their appointment. That sounds like today. We got all these bureaucrats out there, and we're spending exorbitant amounts of money in the various bureaucracies, and we have no real transparency. Even though we got all these transparency laws, we have no true insights as to what's going on in the federal level, especially that non-governmental entity of private bankers, the Federal Reserve. And it goes, nor do we know any more what is the amount of annual expenses of the federal government than we do of the Empire of China. To grant, therefore, such an ample power of taxation and a right of soil to the amount of millions upon the recommendation of this honorable convention without either knowing the amount of the national debt or the annual expenses of government would not argue, in my opinion, the highest degree of prudence. In other words, it was a mess from the very beginning. Now, predictive splash. I want to go on here. I call this a predictive splash on every present issue. This is in Anti-Federalist number 15. And Rhode Island is right, is the article. An essay appeared in the Massachusetts Gazette on December 7, 1787, and it is reprinted from the Freeman's Journal. And this one's unsigned. The state of Rhode Island refused to send delegates to the federal convention. And did you all know that? They didn't send any delegates. They thought it was baloney. And the event has manifested that their refusal was a happy one, as the new Constitution, which the convention has proposed to us, is an elective monarchy. Rhode Island was okay with that, which is proverbially the worst form of government. This new government would have been supported at a vast expense, by which our taxes, the right of which is solely vested in Congress, would be doubled or tripled. The liberty of the press is not stipulated for until the amendments came out, the Bill of Rights, and therefore may be invaded at pleasure. And it's still being invaded, even with the Bill of Rights. What is the free press? What are our rights? They're not there. So he goes on to say that the Supreme Continental Court is to have, almost in every case, appellate jurisdiction, both as to the law and fact. Boy, aren't we seeing that? Aren't they manipulating the facts in the courts, especially with the leftist liberal judges? They are. And the law itself. They're pulling up, when you take a look at J6ers, they're pulling up stuff from the 1800s that's never been used before. And now what we're seeing with all of this on a 14th Amendment issue with the candidate running for president, they're taking and having all these problems, which signifies, if there is any meaning in words, the setting aside a trial by jury. We've seen that in the J6ers too. There's no trial by jury. They're all bench trials. In fact, the one in New York with trying to shut everything down with Trump is a bench trial. So Congress will have the power of guaranteeing to every state a right to import black people for 21 years, by which some of the states who have now declined that iniquitous traffic may re-enter into it. For the private laws of every state are to submit to the superior jurisdiction of Congress. A standing army is to be kept afoot, by which the vicious and psychopathic and the time-serving will be exalted, and the brave, the patriotic, and the virtuous will be depressed. Ladies and gentlemen, I go on. I mean, that's where we're at. We're all being depressed who are patriotic, who are brave and virtuous. I go on to talk about the overreach of Congress from Anti-Federalist number 1 and so on. And I then take and try and take you through a quick summary, is that the Anti-Federalist papers predicted a lot of where we are right now. Sam Adams understood the truth. The Anti-Federalists understood the truth. Those who listen to this program, I hope you understand the truth as I try to bring it forth. But, when it comes to quick notes on virtue, I have a list of them in there. But In all governments, virtue will command reverence. That's reverence of us as individuals, reverence of those who would lead morally and virtuous, and reverence of God. Come on back next week.